What a great way to start the evening, Nerida. Wasn't it? It's really, really important to listen to those who have walked the walk and journeyed with God for 68 years. Because we all go through stuff. You know, when we first come to faith, everything is so black and white, so certain, so clear. We know exactly what we believe, and we know who God is, and then stuff happens, and life gets more complex. And the things we once held on to so strongly, we're not quite sure we hold on to those things anymore. Trials come, we read books, we listen to podcasts, we get confused, and we can enter into what I call perplexity, where we think maybe we made a foolish mistake when we gave our life to Christ all those years ago. Maybe people around us are right when they question, because things haven't happened the way that I thought, and people that I prayed for died, and it's not quite worked out exactly as I thought it would work out, and we get perplexed. But if you talk to people who've walked the walk and been on the journey, there comes a point where you move through complexity, perplexity, to a place of simplicity again, which is different to certainty. It's almost like harmony. It's knowing what's important to hold on to and knowing what you can just let go of. And I think it's really important that we learn from those who have walked the walk, how they have navigated that journey. Because some of us are probably in some complex, perplexing situations right now, but actually we come through those. I don't think like our whole life journey is just one thing. It's like we probably do this, don't we? Round and round in circles, or we move forward in cycles. And so I just want to encourage us all to ensure we have people in our lives who have walked the walk and are still loving Jesus and have a simplicity of faith that we wish that we could get back, but we can't get back, but we can move into. So thank you for that great start to our service this evening. It's so important, because I know some of us are facing some challenges, and I think a lot of the singing tonight was about the darkness, trembling and breaking through, and it's really important, but stick with it. What tends to happen sometimes is that in the perplexity moment, people can either choose to run into God or run away from him. And that's when people start to abandon faith, abandon church, because it doesn't make sense and it's too painful to be there. But if we stick with it, we come into simplicity and into harmony again. So get your hopes up. We like to say, British people, don't get your hopes up. Get your hopes up, okay? Get your hopes up. Anyway, I like coming here. I like the banners because it does remind me, we did the same thing around the same time on bits of paper. And so I never read them all the time. But when I come here, they're still there. Are they coming down? Oh, gosh. So it just reminds me of what we have said about ourselves and the city. And so that wasn't a word from God, Paul, but no, it was just, I'm saying I appreciate them, but I don't look at them every week. So what are you going to replace them with? Okay, yeah. Probably not. We need some new carpet. Anyway, so as Naomi said, I lead the Pioneer Network. And at the conference in March, we announced that from September, I'm no longer going to be leading Pioneer UK. But Ness Wilson, who leads Open Heaven Church in Loughborough, will be the leader of Pioneer in the UK. So that's a great step forward, the first woman to lead a new church network in the UK. So Ness will be taking on that role. And I will be developing some of the Pioneer international networks that are beginning to spring up. And so there's now a Pioneer network in Australia, a church in New Zealand, And so Jen and Joel and the City Life Christ are part of Pioneer Australia, but, who knows, Pioneer New Zealand? Come on. So we're down there in July for the annual Pioneer Leaders Conference in New South Wales, in Newcastle, New South Wales. There's a Pioneer Network in Sri Lanka, and a little one developing in India and Nepal, in Kenya and in Zambia, in the USA. And Caroline and I were in Cuba back in May. And there's a network of churches there have asked to partner with Pioneer, and so we were there. And they are in revival. I mean, it is phenomenal what God is doing in Cuba right now. They're a communist nation funded by the Russians up until the end of the 80s when the communist bloc fell. All the money dried up in Cuba, and so they went into economic downturn, and revival broke out. Mid-90s, and so this young couple that we've connected with, he's 36. They moved to Havana, planted a church 6 years ago. They planted 22 churches since that time. Just seeing incredible things. They can't be registered, they can't rent buildings, so they meet in people's homes. And I said, what's the biggest challenge you face? And they said, our kids get resentful because the house is full of church people all the time. So I thought, even in the midst of revival, there's normal issues that people are facing. And so it was great. Any Spanish speakers? They don't speak much English in Cuba, so we're going back in January for a little conference. And so if you fancy coming and you speak Spanish, hey, let me know. Okay. So we're looking at, what was the theme again? Naomi? Vocation. Okay. So I like coming here because of these. This tells us the big picture. But what does it mean for the ordinary person, for you and me? So I want to look at Daniel. I was asked to look at Daniel, so we'll look at Daniel as someone who, in the midst of a challenging culture, lived for God and sought to live kingdom values, godly values. And so if you've got your Bible, turn to Daniel chapter 1, and we'll read some verses first of all, and then share a few thoughts about how Daniel can serve as an example. So in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God and those he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put the treasure house of his God. And the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was teaching the language and the literature of the Babylonians. And the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. We sang about them this evening. If you're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told him, "I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than all the other young men of your age? The king would then have my head because of you." Daniel said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So we agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. So here he is, not by choice. He didn't have a vision or a dream to become a servant in the household of Nebuchadnezzar. He was carried off. He was a slave. But here he is in this position, 10 times better than anyone else. First thing we see about Daniel is this. He resolved in his heart not to defile himself. He chose to live counter-culturally. John Wesley, the great evangelist, the first thing he was known for was he formed the Holy Club at Oxford University with his brother and some other friends because they were desperate to be pleasing to God. Now, he hadn't quite understood grace at this point, so it was probably more legalistic than grace-filled, but he was committed to following God, living a life of purity, and serving others. God broke in, saw that passion, warmed his heart, enabled him to receive grace, and he continued to live a life set apart for God, which is what holiness actually is. Live a life not just for himself or self-gratification or self-fulfillment, not serving money or position or power or status or significance, but seeking to serve God. He purposed in his heart, in the midst of the culture, to live differently. Our starting point. In whatever we're called to, we choose to live differently, not according to those values that pervade the culture around us. Secondly, not only did he live distinctly, but he worked diligently. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, they found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters. Paul says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not human masters. We are all created for a purpose. God placed Adam and Eve in a garden. It wasn't Kew Gardens or Whiston Gardens or Mottisfont Gardens. It was a wild, overgrown, chaotic garden. And God said to Adam and to Eve, fill it and subdue it. Bring it under control. Work at it. God has given us a purpose of which we have to work at. Subdue it. So we study hard, we work hard, we apply our logic, we use our creativity, we exhaust all that we have, our gifts, our talents, our resources, to do the things that we're called to do for the greater good. We work diligently to be the best barista or teacher or doctor or nurse or checkout worker or mechanic or lawyer or researcher or social worker or business person or hairdresser or therapist or whatever God has called us to do. We work diligently. Or mother or stay-at-home father, work diligently. Once you start a list, you're going to miss someone out, aren't you? So I tried to be as all-inclusive as possible. We did this invitation to communion a few weeks ago, and I had this list of all the people, and there's one category I missed out, and I got into big trouble for missing out this particular category of person, gender identity-wise. So anyway, lists are challenging. Mothers. We live distinctly. We work diligently. You know, it's not just a case of, God's given me a vision, therefore it's all going to happen. No. We work hard. We use all we have to bring it into being, recognizing that God is the one who is leading and guiding us. The third thing I want to say about Daniel is this, and we see this in Daniel chapter 6, when an edict has gone out, and it says this, that Daniel went to his room to pray as he did every day, 3 times a day. We need to continue to be formed by God. So we make decisions at the start. We choose to work hard, and in the process, we continue to allow God to form us. Prayer isn't about asking God to do things for us. It's about putting ourselves in a place where we can be properly formed by Him. One of the themes that came out of the Pioneer Conference this year was this: if we are to go further, we have to go deeper. And I felt it was for us as a movement, for us as churches, and for us as individuals. If we are to go further in God, we have to go deeper into God. We have to allow Him to form us more, which is why I think there's been a resurgence in some of the spiritual disciplines, the house of prayer, the mustard seed missional order, some things that are being resurrected in a modern context. We ran over Easter a week of guided prayer. You could sign up for the week and meet someone twice a day to help you for a retreat while still at work, being formed by Christ. That TV program that was on a couple of years ago called The Monastery, where people who were complete pagans went and spent like a month in the monastery. And in that place, they were challenged about their lifestyles, about their attitudes, and they were exposed to be formed by God in a fresh way. And so Daniel continued to allow God to form him in the process of what he was called to do. We need to be formed by God and find place of intimacy with Him. If we are to go further, we have to go deeper. Fourthly, I would say this about Daniel: expect more. So he's getting on, he's making good decisions, he's keeping himself pure, he's working hard, he's spending time with God, doing all the right, ticking all the boxes. It's great. But then stuff happens around him. So Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. Who steps up? Daniel, with the interpretation. Then there's the writing on the wall. Who steps up? Daniel. Stuff happens. Supernatural stuff happens. And we've got to be expectant for those moments when we don't know when it's going to happen, that God suddenly gives an opportunity for us to step in. Maybe to offer a prayer. Maybe a supernatural door is opened. But stuff happens. We need to expect more. We had a testimony at Central Hall this morning, and we have these little cards which say, God did this for me. And so one person had written how they'd been praying, and they were in debt, and they prayed that God would help them. And they wrote, and someone supernaturally phoned and said, I would like to give you some money. And then another card was the same story. It was the couple who were praying. She had a dream in the night. And in this dream, she saw this couple who needed money, and they then prayed and gave them the money. And it was the same story. It was just two sides of it. As God stepped in. And Daniel then has the opportunities to step into a realm that wouldn't have been there otherwise, just by making good decisions, just by working hard, and just by allowing Christ to form him. There was more that took place. And I'm hoping and believing that as we continue to serve God faithfully, there'll be those more moments where we just unexpectedly, God gives opportunities that we could never have dreamt or imagined. So expect more. And then fifthly, so Daniel 1-6 are all the stories. It's like if you went to Sunday school, it's all the stories of what you learned. 7 through to the end is like a bit weird. It's all the prophecies. So what you get in Daniel is it's what's going on the earth, the lion's den and the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire, and the dreams, the writing on the wall. And then you get like the spiritual picture of what's going on in the heavenly realms. So Daniel understood the bigger picture. He wasn't just absorbed in what was going on day by day. He had a revelation of what God was up to, about the power dynamics that were taking place in the heavenly places, about who ultimately would win. He wasn't thinking, oh, this is so terrible, we're oppressed. He saw a picture of the Ancient of Days being given all authority. He saw a picture of the kingdom of heaven lasting forever, whilst in Babylon, the greatest power on earth at that time. He saw more. He saw the bigger picture. He wasn't just self-absorbed. It wasn't just about him and his family and his career and his destiny. There was something bigger that he had caught hold of that enabled him then to get up every day and keep walking. In fact, in Daniel chapter 9, verses 2 and 3, it says this: I, Daniel, understood from the scriptures, according to the word of the Lord given to Jeremiah the prophet, that the desolation of Jerusalem would last 70 years. So probably what's happened is it's getting towards the end of 70 years. So I turned to the Lord God and pleaded with him in prayer and petition, in fasting and sackcloth and ashes. So he gets gripped again by the destiny of the people of God. We, as a movement, as churches, were birthed in charismatic renewal. We were birthed in an expectation and a hope for revival. And then probably, I don't know, at some point, maybe in the mid-90s, late 90s, we got a little disillusioned with the revival word. And we stopped using it because it was like just too, we expected it didn't happen. So let's just like put our disappointment to the side and just go on and work harder than we have been working. But over these last few months, I've been sensing a stirring again of expectation. Not like a triumphalistic, but when I look at the state of society, it needs an awakening. We need an awakening. We need God to break in, and all of our hard work and effort has not achieved it. We need a supernatural, heavenly encounter that will transform people's lives. We do. There's a great guy I've been listening to on podcasts from Australia called Mark Sayers, who is a cultural critic. And he just unpacks how that when societies get into the sort of mess that we're in, they are the times that God seems to break in. With the Methodist revival, when we think like revival, we think like Welsh revival, 6 months, 100,000 people get saved, pubs close, courts close. The Methodist revival wasn't like that. It was slow and steady for like 100 years. They saw 4.5% growth a year, every year, for 100 years. They grew from 72,000 members in 1791 to 1 million members within 100 years. It was an awakening, a transformation. And Daniel saw the plight of the people of God, and he had the word of God, what Jeremiah spoke, and he turned in prayer. A few weeks ago at Central Hall, I had a prophetic word. I don't bring prophetic words very often. I just don't. And I had this word from John chapter 15. It says this: if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. So I felt prompted to say to all of those who have been around for a while, like from the beginning of our church, like pre-Central Hall days, this applies to you as well. Because you've remained, whatever you ask, it will be done. And so I think that there is going back to the start of our service, narrow down, There is an authority that I believe some of you Remainers, no political puns meant there, okay? Some of you who have remained, there's a new authority in prayer coming for you because you have remained. Whatever you ask, it will be done. Now, either Jesus meant what he said or not. And there's something about having remained and stuck around and stayed firmly established that our hearts are purified. Our hearts are changed so that we end up praying God's prayers as opposed to our prayers. Because you've remained. And I think linking this whole thing to revival or awakening or whatever we want to call it, outpouring, those of you who have remained, as you give yourselves to prayer in this next season, I believe you'll see more fruitfulness in this season, this prayerful season, than in 40 years of activity. So I'm speaking out. Because you've remained. There's an authority you have in prayer. God will listen. And whatever you ask, it will be done. And so I want to encourage you, particularly those of you who have been around a while, that it's your season. Sometimes we think, well, we've had our season. You've seen God do amazing things and his provision and his protection and his kindness. And the best was back there. We sit around, we have cheese and wine evenings and talk about the good old days. That's not what we'll be less involved, less active, but the authority in our prayer lives, I believe, will bring breakthrough to the next generations. And so I want to encourage those of you who have remained to take hold of that authority in prayer like Daniel did. You read on the story, and the people returned, didn't they? Nehemiah and Ezra. The books about aren't in chronological order, but Nehemiah and Ezra, they followed after Daniel and went back to got the promised land and rebuilt, and so they fulfilled that because he gave himself to pray. So Daniel, I love Daniel. I think he's a great character. Not a great start in life to be taken as a slave, trafficked to a foreign country, but he chose to live distinctly, work diligently. He allowed God to form him in that place of prayer. He expected more of heaven, and he understood what it was that God was doing. That's my prayer for each one of us, that as we seek to fulfill God's destiny upon our lives, that we live like he lived, that we pray like he prayed, and we maybe do some of the things that he did in his time. Amen? Amen. Lord, thank you for the great examples of men and women in the Bible who just resonate with your love and your life. And for each one of us, Lord, whatever stage we're at, whether we're at that excited, certain stage, or we're into complexity or perplexity, we're confused, Lord, I pray, bring us through to the place of simplicity and harmony again. Lord, for each one of us, Lord, as we serve you, as we love those around us, Father, I pray, fill us with your Spirit, Lord, day by day by day. Lord, I pray for those of us who have remained. I do pray, Lord, for that fresh authority in prayer. If that's you, just say, Lord, I receive that. I receive that. And I would encourage you to pray very specific prayers. Pray very specific prayers in line with God's vision for this church and for the people around you. And I believe we'll hear testimonies and stories of God's faithfulness and power in a way that we've not known for a long, long time. And so, Lord, I pray, fill us with that confidence. Let hope arise in each of us, I pray. Lord, for people here who are in challenging circumstances, Lord, let your grace come to them right now. Let your comfort surround them right now, Lord. Let the seeds of hope be planted in their hearts, I pray. In Jesus' name we ask you. Amen. Amen. I think we're going to sing and respond. So, is that good? Amen.